As you guys know, laws passed by Congress impact the economy. But Congress really has no systematic way to comprehensively track and assess the economic impact of legislative actions, especially when laws empower federal agencies to regulate. While the current budget process scores and tracks the economic impact of spending and taxes, it does not account for economic consequences of regulation. The budget process and regulatory process currently work in isolation for together. We kind of want to put them together. So what we're going to do today is we're going to discuss how the budget process assists Congress in exercising its tax and spending powers, elements of the budget process that weaken Congress's management of government spending, how the power to regulate operates like the powers to tax and spend, but without a defined process for congressional management, and how budget and regulatory process reforms could advance good government practices. We all want good government, and this includes accountability, transparency, what I would call a constitutionally sound governance of checks and balances. We don't cede more power than necessary to one branch of government over the other. Robin mentioned the idea we're going to go through sort of the Congress and the federal budget process. I'm going to try to do it basically very briefly in 15 minutes or less. We have a presentation I gave, it's online, where I spent 2 full hours talking about the federal budget process to congressional staff. If you want it, we can give you the link for it online. But we're going to go through just sort of the basics today. The budget process enables Congress to manage revenue and discretionary spending. Have discretionary spending on there, not mandatory. Mandatory is basically 2/3 of the budget right now, but it's sort of set on autopilot. Discretionary spending bills are the bills that Congress has to go through every year and authorize and appropriate, where mandatory spending just continues unless Congress takes action to change it. The budget provides a feedback loop to determine if the expenditures authorized by Congress achieve the intended results and how those expenditures impacted the economy, but in some ways only a little bit. There is an opportunity to compare results and set priorities for the coming year. That's sort of what budgeting is all about. But these budgets currently have weaknesses. Outputs are measured rather than outcomes. How much dollars did you spend? How many people did you employ? How many checks did you write? How many publications did you put out? How many roads did you fix? How many bridges did you fix? They're not outcome-based. How many folks are better off today than they were tomorrow because they have jobs? How much has been done for educational achievement? Have we improved transportation quality, not just put more miles of roads in the ground? So we don't look at outcomes, we look at outputs. And of course, there's an old adage that you get what you measure. If we measure outputs, we'll keep getting them. That's one of the weaknesses of the budget process. Major spending and debt obligations are undermanaged. We've had fiscal cliffs, we've had debt crises, we've had a lot of things going on. We've been unable to manage them with our current budget process. It's led some to conclude that the budget process might be, quote unquote, broken, and of course in need of reform. The current process does not account for the economic impact and cost of regulations. This is a huge, huge issue because sometimes Congress will say, go implement this law, the Affordable Care Act, the Clean Air Act, go implement it. Agency, it's up to you to do it, the administration. But they don't actually figure out what the actual costs are going to be, or they don't know the impact of it when they pass the bills, and there's no way to go back and look at this at a future time. There's no feedback for it. Hence, there's no current look-back ability for Congress to determine if the cost of regulation matches expectations. Think about the discussions that went on with Dodd-Frank, with the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act will not add one dime to the deficit. Dodd-Frank will not harm businesses or small businesses to make them able to non-comply with the law. That's sort of congressional intent. How do they go back and look to see whether or not that intent actually happened or the costs were different than they expected? There's no look-back feature in the current budget to do that today. I don't know if we have it. I think we have it in your pamphlet. Hopefully we do. But this is the current congressional budget process. I am not going to go through the entire thing, but basically it goes through the authorization, the appropriation, the congressional committees of jurisdiction, the budget committee, again with authorizers and appropriators. But generally, in a nutshell, what does this say? You get to the budget process, puts the executive branch in Congress on the same page. Basically 3 steps. The first step is the president's budget. And the Office of Management and Budget manages the formulation of agency budget requests and the evaluation of agency performance and strategic plans. Every agency has to first submit their budget to the Office of Management and Budget. This process starts 18 months before the actual budget year. So at any one point in time, OMB is actually managing 3 fiscal years. The current one, the one that's under evaluation under the current consideration of Congress, and then the future one that's coming up. So they're juggling 3 budgets at once. The president's supposed to propose a budget request and submit it to Congress on the first Monday of the first full week in February. I usually have a smiley face after this because it usually doesn't make it on time, usually, but sometimes it does happen. And then there's something called the mid-session review, 6 months out. This is a report submitted to Congress that outlines any changes to the economic or legislative impact of the president's proposed budget. And it's actually due July 15th. Does anyone here know whether it came out on time this year? It actually came out July 14th. They were 1 day early. Took me by surprise. Like, what is this mid-session review? It's 1 day early. The presidential administration usually is always late with this stuff. In the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, the 3 of them combined, there was only 1 article that covered the mid-session review. Usually it does some important information that looks at what does the administration think is going to change with the economic impact, GDP growth, inflation. No one covered it this year. Apparently they were too busy doing other stuff. But usually it's sort of a big event. Stage 2 is a concurrent budget resolution. This now takes on where the Congress gets involved after the president submits the budget. This is where they start doing, Congress does a budget resolution. This frames the big picture, if you will, of aggregate levels of spending and revenue levels. The legislative committees submit jurisdictional, quote-unquote, views and estimates of spending and revenues to the chamber's budget committees. This is kind of important. No spending, revenue, debt limit legislation can be considered before a budget resolution passes unless the rule is waived in both the House and Senate, or you get past May 15th. The reason I bring this up is, do you remember the debt? We're going to have a debt ceiling debate coming up this fall again. If you go back to last year and the year before, what was interesting is when Secretary Lew handed to Congress a letter that says we're hitting the debt ceiling. Do you know what date he put down? May 15th, because Congress couldn't actually consider any changes to the debt limit unless they had passed the budget resolution, which they weren't going to do on time, or until May 15th. They actually hit the limit basically on April 1st before it started doing extraordinary measures, but it would have done for Secretary Lew no good to put in there April 1st, April 15th, May 1, because Congress couldn't do anything about it. This is sort of an underlying theme of the budget, is the budget inherently is a political document, and it's all politics. It's a statement of one's political agenda from both sides of the administration and the Congress. So always keep in mind that politics, are at play here. The House and Senate then agree on a concurrent budget resolution. This is not law, and so no signature by the president is required. The concurrent budget resolution includes, again, aggregate levels of federal spending, aggregate levels of new budget authority and outlays. Budget authority is the amount Congress commits or allows the federal government to commit to spend, where outlays are the amount of revenue that flow from the Treasury. The reason this is important is figure out what budget authority and outlays mean. Outlays is sort of like what happens when someone you give a check to cashes it from your bank. The money comes out of your account. The reason we have different levels of budget authority and outlay is imagine you're the federal government, and you want to contract to create an aircraft carrier, or build an aircraft carrier. That can take 10 years to build. Because of the process, no contractor is going to sign a contract if they don't know if they're going to get the authority to have money paid over the course of years. So Congress may say, we're going to authorize the Defense Department to have budget authority over a 10-year window, but outlay authority that could change in each of those years for checks. So basically, one is the ability to write checks or contracts. The other is when those checks can be cashed. The resolution sets target levels for surplus, deficit, and debt ceiling. And this leads down to what's called the Section 302 allocations. Section 302A allocations provide the aggregate spending levels in the House and Senate Appropriations Committees, where 302B allocations are the levels of spending assigned to each appropriations subcommittee. So you'll notice so far we've talked about discretionary spending and taxes. There's nothing there about regulations. There's nothing in there sort of about transparency. There is no feedback loop where someone says to Congress, hey, agencies come in, you have to submit your budget, but tell us what happened 3 years ago, that regulation you did. Was it in line with what we wanted to do? This is one of the major weaknesses of the current budget process that we're trying to change. And we think about how we could incorporate sort of a regulatory spending or regulatory budget in the process. Some people have argued we should just throw out the current 1974 Budget Act altogether and just start over again. That might be a little bit complicated to do. We are trying to figure out a way to incorporate into the current framework I'm outlining here how we can do regulatory spending as well. So when we go through the idea of targeted outlays, aggregate levels of spending, aggregate levels of revenue, think about having aggregate levels of economic cost of regulation right alongside these. We could put a regulatory budget right alongside the current budget process in the same way we do revenues and outlays right now. This leads us to stage 3, which you We do a budget resolution. Sometimes we do, budget reconciliation. Sometimes we do it, sometimes we don't. But a budget reconciliation is a process to achieve the revenue, mandatory spending, and debt ceiling levels that are assumed in the budget resolution. This is done sometimes, usually and historically, it was done for deficit reduction. A reconciliation language cannot be filibustered in the Senate. A regular budget can, and so it sets these guidelines. And what generally happened historically is Congress was unwilling to pass any sort of budget bills that reduce spending because they have a constituent involved. And it became horse trading. Well, if you vote to cut my spending, I'm going to vote to cut your spending. And so the idea of reconciliation language was to set an aggregate target of deficit reduction that said we want to achieve $100 billion deficit reduction without saying how to do it. And the Congress would agree, you couldn't filibuster the Senate, and then that level would be handed down the 302A and B allocations down to the committees, and they'd have to figure out how to do it themselves. Republicans got smart in 2000 and said, wait, if we can do aggregate levels of deficit reduction, can't we do aggregate levels of revenue reductions? And so they used it for tax cuts. And this is where you had the Bush tax cuts being used in reconciliation. But with reconciliation, everything has to fit in the 10-year budget window. And that's why the Bush tax cuts expired after 10 years. And then Congress then did a temporary extension for 1 year, 2 years. Then we had the fiscal cliff deal with President Obama. The deal was they were all made permanent except the top rate, which went back up to the Clinton levels before Bush tax cuts came in. So this is the reconciliation process. Legislative committees provide the statutory changes necessary to meet the budget instructions. They are subject to expedited procedures that limit debate and amendments. And again, you can't be filibustered in the Senate. And it does require, though, the president's signature, so it could be vetoed. When thinking about enforcement, again, think about how we would do this also with a regulatory type budget. There's points of order. Floor procedure that prevents Congress from passing legislation that's not in line with the budget resolution. So if someone has something they want to bring up that's not in the budget resolution, someone can say it's a point of order, it's not germane, or it breaks the caps, you can't do it. In the House, you could actually waive this by a simple majority, but in the Senate, you need 60 votes because it's subject to filibuster. We also have PAYGO, which requires tax cuts and entitlement spending increases be fully offset unless they fit within the targets of the budget resolution. PAYGO's gone back and forth, on and off. It was basically defined by the Budget Enforcement Act of 1990. It expired after fiscal year 2002, but the House and Senate made it a rule starting with the 111th Congress, so it's still in place today. Recently, we've had a change when the Republicans took control of the House that was called cut-go. Kind of cute. Instead of pay-as-you-go, it was cut-as-you-go. And this meant that mandatory spending must be offset by mandatory spending cuts alone. Before, someone in Congress could say, I want to increase Social Security payments, I want to increase Medicare, I want to increase Medicaid, and I will do it by raising taxes. Now the idea is if you want to raise mandatory spending, you've got to cut mandatory spending somewhere else. That's the cut-go rule. All this stuff with the current budget leads to a few problems. Basically, policy drives the budget versus the budget driving policy. We see a lot of times where people will say, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this, add it up, and that's what we spend. It's the opposite of how a family works, right? We all have salaries, we have income, we have a budget constraint. We go and say, I make X amount of money, how much can I afford for housing, how much can I afford for a car, how much can I afford for entertainment, how much can I afford to go out on a date? Congress is the opposite. I want to go on 20 dates, I want to have 6 houses, I want to have all these cars, and we'll figure out somebody to pay for it later. So it basically works the opposite. Economic impacts are difficult to track because minor management of entitlements, which are 2/3 of the budget right now. The increasing cost of entitlements is crowding out our ability to spend things on discretionary spending. Education, roads, the highway trust fund bill we're talking about today. Because entitlements are growing in an automatic pilot, in some ways they're crowding out our ability to do other things. It makes the discretionary spending small to total and much more harder to pass and budget. Several types of spending are left out. We don't talk about loan guarantees. Fannie and Freddie, for example, were never part of the budget. We're thinking about the cost of the economy regulations. What does that mean? They were excluded from the current budget process. The future cost of entitlement obligations. We have a 10-year window. What if we had to score the Affordable Care Act on a net present value over a 75-year or 100-year horizon, and not just a 10-year budget window? If you look at the estimated cost of the ACA when it was passed, a lot of the costs were back-ended and started in year 11, year 12. Even under the OMB's math, if it would have been a 10-year neutrality on a budget window, it wasn't in year 11, year 12. So we have these problems with future entitlements. And again, regulations. The cost of regulations are left out of the budget. So we have an opportunity now to consider what's called legislative impact accounting. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jerry Ellig to give the next part of the speech before going to Patrick McLaughlin.